Okay, hi, I'm Margaret Workman, and
Hi, I'm Mark Potosnak.
this workshop is on teaching online labs and meeting the learning outcomes for SI labs. So welcome, and we're glad you're here. We'll tell you a little bit about the course. Mark's going to start off and tell you about the course and the background behind why we taught this course.
Yes, again, everybody, welcome. Mark Potosnak, and I'm chair of the Scientific Inquiry domain. And so I'm just going to give a little background from that perspective. Maggie will talk mostly about the course, but she was the actual instructor for the course. About a little over a year ago, the Scientific Inquiry domain was contacted by Academics Affairs in John Mario's office, and there was a request that we consider doing an online SI lab. Now, there'd been some discussions about SI online labs, and you can imagine it's a little bit, I don't want to call it contentious, but we want to make sure we can accomplish the learning outcomes of the SI online lab without compromise. So we started exploring this. I think there's new technology. We're using Zoom here today, which seems to work pretty well. Maggie will go through a lot of the nitty gritty. But I think we were fairly pleased. So what we did is we had this initial meeting in spring 2018. We agreed that we'd give this a try. Maggie volunteered to be the instructor. She carried out the actual lab in the fall of 2018. She then reported back to the SI committee, and I think there was no negative reaction from the committee. Everyone was really impressed with how everything went. And then we won't talk too much about this today, but we actually got into some of the issues during our 2018-2019 assessment project for the Scientific Inquiry Domain Committee. And I'm going to turn it back over to Maggie, and also apologize. I have some business down here. I'm representing academic institutions on the Cook County Environmental Board, and I'm in the middle of a board meeting, so I need to be at their beck and call. I might be able to pop back in and out. Maggie obviously can answer all the questions about the course itself. If you have any more questions from the course, more from the Scientific Inquiry Domain Committee, you can certainly shoot me an email, or I might be able to come back in towards the end of the meeting. So I think I'm going to sign off, and thank you very much.
Okay, so I'll continue. As Mark said, this pilot project was at the request of Academic Affairs. One of the issues is that there are some programs where you could get a totally online degree except for the Scientific Inquiry Lab component. So they wanted to explore the opportunities to make that possible. And so I did the pilot project in autumn quarter 2018 using an already established class, ENV 102, Introduction to Environmental Science with Lab. We have been teaching this course for probably 30 years, since the beginning of the environmental science program. This meets the Scientific Inquiry Laboratory requirement in the Liberal Studies program. I had 17 students signed up for the course, which was a fairly good number because we added it very late to the course catalog. And so most of the students had already gone through Premier DePaul and had already selected their classes. So having 17 students was good. And it was good to have a smaller number of students for the pilot project. So what I chose to do was to use lab kits from HandsOn Labs. And so this is where students order a lab kit that's already created from this company, and then it gets sent to their home. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's how I chose to go about the project. There are other options for people that they can do. I do have a Quality Matters designation in progress, so I have applied to get the Quality Matters designation for it. So hopefully I'll end up getting that. So as I said, I used this company called HandsOn Lab Kits. They're totally dedicated to making online lab kits for universities that are doing online labs. They've been doing it for many years. They are all self-contained college level lab kits, so they are rigorous, and they use experiments and laboratory grade equipment that mirrors traditional laboratory experiments. So they're not doing just what I might call kitchen chemistry or using things that they find around the house. They do get things like graduated cylinders and beakers and little balances, and depending on what your field is. Uh, Here's a list of the fields that they have kits for. So they have ready-made kits, but you can also custom make yours by using, one or two experiments from one category or from another category. So they have anatomy and physiology, biology, chemistry, environmental science, forensic science, geology, geob chemistry, microbiology, and physics. So I know I attended a webinar before I started with HandsOn Lab Kits, and the instructor who talked about his class in anatomy and physiology. I mean, he had students doing dissections. You can get little skeleton models and things. So there's very, high quality laboratory equipment. And we can go through later on if you're interested to see what what are the labs in each of those categories, or in your particular category. I can click on those and show you that at the end. What I chose to do, these are the lab experiments that I did. The first one was climate change and the scientific method. A plate tectonics lab, properties of soil, water quality and dissolved oxygen, biomes, ecosystems, and habitats, population ecology, a natural selection lab, a greenhouse effect lab, and then a group project. And I'll talk about more about that because that required some special design considerations when I created the lab kit. All of these experiments mirrored the experiments that we did in the face-to-face laboratory. I was able to find experiments that were very similar. In fact, there was one or two that is better than what we do in the face-to-face class. So I was very happy with the options and the selection that I made. One issue is I did not select a rock cycle lab, which we do in the face-to-face class. That was the one exception. And that is because adding the rocks to the kit made it extremely expensive. And so I, just chose not to do that. I could have added that. They did have one, but I just chose not to do that for the students for cost considerations. Let's see. So let's talk a little bit about cost, because this is one issue that I think needs to be thought about when we're going forward with teaching these online labs. The kit, as I created it, cost the students $272. Well, it cost $272 to make the kit when you ordered it from the company. And that's without the Rock Cycle Lab. With the Rock Cycle Lab, it was over $300. So I think this is kind of a significant cost to the students. We ended up, for the pilot project, we charged the student only $150. So they could order it from the company on their website, and they were charged $150. And then on the back end, the company billed us for the extra. And we chose $150 because that was the cost of the usual textbook. And so we thought that was a fair price, because normally they would have to spend $150 for the face-to-face class. So we made it very similar. And then I used an open source textbook that I found that met my needs. So they didn't have a textbook cost. The department contributed $30 towards that difference between the cost of the kit and what we charge the students. And that is based on a calculation that we made per student, which is the cost of a face-to-face lab. So I went through my face-to-face lab and I added up all of the consumable costs, and it came out to be about $30 per student. Now that doesn't include things like major equipment purchases that we made, but those are just the consumable things. So we contributed $30. And then, oh, my lights went out, I'm sorry. Sorry. And then the university contributed $92 for the pilot project. just because they wanted to see if we were able to do this. So that's not something that we could probably count on from here forward, but we were able to do it for the pilot project. So again, I think cost does come into our thoughts when we pursue this. Another thing I did is I partnered with the Idealisation Lab, the IRL, the makerspace that's downtown in the Loop. And the reason I did this is because, you know, the lab kit cost the students $150, but the HandsOn Lab company did require the students to provide some materials from their home. Most of the things are just basic, you know, items that the students probably have, like paper towels or Ziploc bags, or a spoon or a pot or pan, those sorts of things. But there were a few items that I felt the students might not have, like if they lived in the dorm or even in their apartment, like bleach. Maybe they have bleach, but I don't know that many students like use bleach when they do laundry. Also some rubbing alcohol. And so I didn't want the students to have to spend any more money than they already spent on the kit. So what I did is I put together a container that had all of the items that the students would need outside of what they got in the kit. And I told the students that they could go to the Idealisation Lab and check out the box and use any of the materials in there. So if you've never been to the Idealisation Lab, there's a picture of the downtown location, which was the only option at the time when I did the pilot project. But they have a room where they have bins, so people who are coming and making things can, you know, store their materials if they can't get anything done in one setting. So it was very easy. They had a bin there. Students could come and check in and out on materials. So I felt that was important. Personally, I did that. It's probably not something everybody has to do, but again, I didn't want the students to have to spend any more money. Okay, so what did I do in the class to try and meet all of the learning outcomes? One thing I did is I used video lecture clips, which is typical for any sort of online class, even if it, you know, doesn't have a lab. I held live office hours through Zoom, so just a meeting just like this. I also did a live lab session using Zoom, which I'll talk about. So for every lab, I held a live lab session. There was a group lab project, and again, I designed it this way to meet the learning outcomes. I did have discussion board questions for them to do. There were typical readings from my online textbook, and then they had quizzes over the reading materials. So here's just a example of one of my video lecture clips. I chose to do these in a green screen room with the slides behind me so they could see me, to give a little bit more instructor presence. There is a little video clip there, so I think if this gets added to the archive, if you're interested, and this is like a 50-second video clip, but it's a little bit laggy, so I won't do it here. I held live office hours in my lab, just like, you know, I'm doing now. So I sat there for an hour on Zoom, whether or not students showed up. I was there every week. And then I had a live lab session. This is a little video clip that I did from the first lab. I did the first live lab from the Idealisation Lab because I wanted the students, you know, I wanted to introduce the students to the facility in case they had never been there. And so I showed them around, showed them where the kit would be and where they could check out the materials and how they would go about doing that. And then I did the first lab there. They do have a sort of a classroom, kind of a makeshift classroom. I'm going to show this little video clip that my daughter took while I did it. I'm going to turn off the audio because it doesn't matter, but I wanted to show you kind of what it looked like when I did an online lab. And again, this is like a 10-second clip. So, you know, I had an iPad and my computer. I had the materials in front of me, but as you can see, I did a traditional pre-lab discussion using the blackboards there. Um, so the reason I did the live lab session, and this is something that instructors would want to think about, but I designed my class very specifically to satisfy the scientific inquiry domain committee, because they had a lot of concerns, or they had some concerns about this online lab experience. And one of the concerns is that they felt that students got something extra by doing labs together with other students or with the instructor, that they would be missing something by not doing the lab side by side with somebody. Like maybe they can see what the other person's doing or ask questions or you know, whatever. I'm not quite sure what they were concerned about. So to address that concern, I held the live lab session. I told the students that I would be doing the lab live. I did it on a Thursday night. And I did the labs in our laboratory here in McGowan South. And I told the students if they wanted to bring their lab kit, they could come to McGowan South and do it with me, you know, in person. But I also did it live via Zoom, so they could, you know, stay home and do the lab live with me on Zoom. And so that was my way of having the students experience doing the lab with other students or the instructor, to satisfy sort of some of the concerns that the Scientific Inquiry Domain Committee had. So that's why I chose to do live lab. I did do the first one in the Idealisation Lab, but I did all of the rest of them in the laboratory. So in the live lab session, I did a traditional pre-lab discussion. The first one I did, as you saw in that video, I did it using a whiteboard, and I had my daughter stand there with my computer and follow me around so she could have a close up on what I was doing to see the whiteboard. The students had a little bit trouble seeing the board. And so the next time, what I did for the next lab is I still did it on the whiteboard in the laboratory, but I used an iPad that was logged in as a participant to get kind of close up on me, and it was easy to move around myself, so they could follow me down the whiteboard. That was better. The students found that better. But then after that, I just went to something just like this, where I had, I made PowerPoint slides and I screen shared the pre-lab discussion. So that's actually a clip from the water quality pre-lab discussion that I made. I just took a picture of the slideshow. So I did a traditional pre-lab discussion, and then I reviewed the materials that were needed from the lab kit. So I pulled out each item that they were using from the lab kit, because the lab kit does come boxed up very tightly. They use every space available in the box. And so some things were like found inside other things. So I know when I was trying to find the material for for each lab, you know, I had trouble finding a couple of the things, and that's when I knew what I was looking for. So I was afraid the students might not be able to find like which one is the graduated pipette and which one is the not graduated pipette. So I went through, I pulled out all of the materials that were necessary, and I showed them on the live lab session, like this is the graduated, you know, pipette, or this is the graduated cylinder you use. This is the little bottle that you need. So I showed them, you know, everything that they needed. And then I also went through the things that they would need from their home. And then I walked through the lab procedure. I didn't actually physically do the lab, but for instance, this example is from the water quality lab. I showed like, okay, you would take your water from the river and you would pour it into this beaker, and then you would add this tablet. So I kind of just walked through it so that they would have a little bit of an idea. Oh, and I forgot to mention at the very beginning, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand on the Zoom screen there, or if you want to type something in the chat. Go ahead and ask me questions anytime as you go along. I'm sorry I didn't mention that before. So that's kind of what my live lab sessions look like. So I did that every week on Thursday night. Okay, so here are the SI Lab learning outcomes that need to be met, and I will explain briefly about how I met all of the learning outcomes. But I'm going to focus on the one that was most of concern to the Scientific Inquiry Committee. So the first learning outcome is that they can pose meaningful scientific questions and generate testable scientific hypotheses. They can plan, design, and conduct scientific investigations in a collaborative environment using appropriate tools and techniques to gather relevant data in order to test and revise scientific hypotheses. Now, this is the learning outcome that was a particular concern to the Scientific Inquiry Committee. They did not believe that the students could meet this learning outcome in an online environment, mostly because of the term conduct a scientific investigation in a collaborative environment. They did not feel that in an online environment they could design an experiment in a collaborative environment. So again, I spent a lot of time and a lot of effort in making sure that I was able to meet this learning outcome. And I'm not sure if Mark's still on here. I can't really see all of the participants, but if he had anything he wanted to add, he could hop in here. The third outcome is develop explanations of natural phenomena. The fourth is address variability in the data and recognize and analyze alternative explanations and predictions. And then the last one was communicate scientific procedures, results, and explanations, and engage in arguments based on scientific evidence. And again, this is another of the learning outcomes that the Scientific Inquiry Committee, I think, had a little bit of concerns about, that they wouldn't be able to communicate, their results. So again, I spent a lot of time designing my experiments or my course to meet all of these learning outcomes. Since it was a pilot project, I really was concerned that if I didn't try very hard to really meet these learning outcomes, that they would use it as an excuse to not do online labs. And so I wanted to make sure that I was not the reason that we would not be able to continue with online labs. So I was very careful on how I designed the course. So again, here's the one that was of most concern: plan, design, and conduct scientific investigations in a collaborative environment. So if you're going to teach an online lab, this is something that you'll have to really think about, especially if you use online lab kits, because I was going to have the students do a collaborative project, a research project. If they're getting these kits from the company, there had to be enough materials in the kits to do their experiments. And so what I decided to do is I restricted their research experiment to either water quality or soil quality. And then I had the company put in 3 extra sets of consumables for the water quality and the soil quality lab, so that depending on what the students' experiment was going to be, that they would have at least 3 trials per student to be able to conduct their research project. Again, so depending on what your course is and what kind of experiments you do, you may have to think about this too before you settle on what's included in the kit. Okay, so they had the regular amount of the soil and water quality experiment consumables to do the regular, the lab for the class. And then there was a set of 3 extra consumables for their research project. So in order for them to be successful in their research project, I kind of did a scaffolded assignment. The first week on the the second week on the discussion board, I had them generate hypotheses based on a given scenario. So I gave them a scenario and I had them generate some hypotheses that they wanted to test to help explain this scenario. So they did that on the discussion board. So they came up with some hypotheses, and then they had to comment on other students' hypotheses to, you know, ask them questions about maybe why it was a good hypothesis or things that could be improved, you know, to make the hypothesis better. During week 4, I had them create hypotheses that they were interested in exploring related specifically to soil or water quality, to kind of give them an idea about what they might want to do for their research project, and also to see which students were interested in doing soil testing for the research project and which ones were interested in doing water quality assessment for the research project, so that they could kind of match up with each other. And then there was a 3-week sampling and normal distribution assignment to help them learn about you know, error, so that they could apply this to their research project. So for week 5, they did sampling from a normally distributed population. So there is a, on the HHMI, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, a website, their education website called BioInteractive, they have this sampling and normal distribution. It's called a click and learn, so they can do they put in different numbers and can click, and it gives them some results, like what the standard deviation and such is. So I had them do a, they took a sample from a normally distributed population, and I assigned each student a different size sample, and then they had to post their result on the discussion board and compare, you know, based on what their sampling size was. So if a student had a sample of, you know, 4 samples, or 100, they could compare what the standard deviations were. And then part 2 of this assignment, they did standard error of the mean. And so they compared what this standard deviation was from different size samples. And then the last one, they had to apply what they learned on a given sort of a research project. So the story sort of went like, students did an experiment where they used cellulase and I think pectinase on apples, and they collected how much apple juice they made, and then they had to see which of these, what either cellulase or pectinase or a combination of 2 produced the most apple juice, and if there was a significant difference between those. And so they had to apply what they learned. And then in week 8, they worked in groups and they came up with their research project, and they had to do a Zoom lab group proposal. So through Zoom, they presented what their experiment was going to be, with the hypothesis and how they were going to test it, you know, what they were going to do. During week 9, we had Zoom group consultations on their project to make sure that you know, everything was going well. And then on week 10, they did their final Zoom group presentation. So they were, you know, they presented this to the entire class. So here's a quick example of one of the research projects that the students did, and it's just a clip of, it's not their whole project, but it's just a few minutes of it. But I wanted to show you the quality that I got from the students. I will say that I was really blown away with their projects, what they were able to do. In fact, I think these final projects are better than what I have received in a face-to-face class. So I was very happy with the results.
Taking the time to look through our critical analysis of the various water fountains found in the Loop and the Lincoln Park campuses. This documentation and analysis was put together by Sam, Rosalind, Eunice, and Paul.
Let me know if you can't hear it.
So just to give a little recap, our research question is the water quality from the water fountains at DePaul's Lincoln Park and Loop campuses suitable for human consumption? And do the qualities of the water from each individual fountain vary between campuses and different kinds of water fountains? And so our hypothesis is, due to the newer buildings, pipes, and water fountains, our team believes that the Loop campus will overall display water samples of higher quality. The reasons why is that because most of the water fountains at the Lincoln Park campuses are older models, while several of the water fountains installed in the Loop campus are equipped with filters, such as the LK. We predict that the general results of the water quality for both campuses will be similar, but we do think that the Loop campus will produce cleaner results. By testing the nitrogen, phosphorus, and pH levels, we will be able to determine the water quality between two subjects.
Feel free to take a look at the Excel document provided in order to interpret the findings on your own. Now, for the most part, we found that all of the pH levels and the nitrate levels and the phosphate levels for the samples that we looked at were within a safe range for human consumption. And there wasn't a ton of variance between campuses or between the new versus old water fountains. Now, when you're looking at the pH levels, the 95% confidence interval, you'll notice that the average means are about the same for both the Loop and the Lincoln Park campus. And the pH level is just a little bit higher, roughly 0.2 or 0.3 within the Loop campus. And when you take a look at the new versus old water fountains, the first thing you'll probably notice is that there are no error bars on the new column. And this is because every single new water fountain exhibited a pH level of 7. And so it is substantially lower than the old water fountains, which had an average pH level of 7.8. Now, when you're looking at the nitrate levels, you'll notice that the Loop average is substantially lower than the Lincoln Park average, roughly 2.5 parts per million in terms of total difference. And the margin of error is much larger for the Loop, and that sort of helps to explain why the error bar is much larger there, whereas the Lincoln Park samples we collected had a much lower variance. Now, in terms of the new versus old water fountains, when looking at nitrate levels, the findings were very similar, and there was only about a 0.2 parts per million difference, with the newer one models actually having a higher concentration of nitrate levels. Now, this could be due to a sampling error or something of that nature, but I think really the main takeaway is that when you're working with the supplies we were provided through our laboratory test kit, it's really hard to get the most accurate number, especially beyond a whole number of parts per million. So they are roughly the same, and I don't think that there really is much variance there whatsoever. Now, the same thing can be applied, the same logic can be applied to the phosphate levels when you're looking at the new versus old. It stands to reason that one would expect that the new water fountains would have a lower level of phosphates. But again, the variance is so small.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. I think it gives you an idea about what they were able to produce. Again, I was happy with the results. They had, nice graphs. They actually included error bars, which generally the students in the face-to-face class don't do. So I thought that was good. They all worked together. They were able to use the materials from the lab kit. So I felt it was a successful lab project. We did it collaboratively, so I felt we met the learning outcome. Okay, so I used the HandsOn Lab Kits, and I chose that. Why I chose that is because they have a nice platform that includes some background material, and so everything can be done on their platform. They can collect the data, they can make graphs, all of that sort of thing. But there are other options that people could use. There is this eScience Labs, and I have the information there. There's also Carolina Biological. They have a new distance learning program. The difference between these is like for Carolina, you're just purchasing Carolina kits. They have no supporting materials. So there's no background materials. You have to provide everything. And same thing for eScience Labs. So if you're interested in providing more of your own materials, those might be the way to go, because I do think like the Carolina kit might be a little bit cheaper, but they don't provide the background support. However, they have very similar lab groupings. So, you know, there's still physics and biology and chemistry and anatomy and physiology. You know, all of those things are also included in those. So they provide a good range also. One other thing I wanted to mention why I think this online lab is good is that we have such a diversity of students here at DePaul that this online lab provided a lot of students with completing their degree in a timely manner. In fact, there were 2 students that I had that said they would not have been able to get their degree without the online lab. So I was very happy for that. One woman had just had a baby. She had a newborn, just a few weeks old. And so it would have been very difficult for her to attend a regular face-to-face lab. And there was one woman who was about to give birth. She was like 8 months pregnant. So again, it made her life a lot easier. Also, some of the students said that they lived in the suburbs and it was very difficult for them to get to the Lincoln Park campus for the lab classes, because most lab classes are in Lincoln Park. And just, you know, from the suburbs, you have to, you know, maybe take a metro downtown and then take the L up here. I mean, it's possible to do, but students found it, you know, more difficult. So this was at least more convenient for them. So here is an example of a screenshot of the website. So I'm going to take you a little bit through the website, and then I'll actually go online and show you that. So there's 3 sections here. There's the exploration section, which is this first one. So this is what I was talking about, where they provide background material. So, so for instance, there are several pages. You can see this is page 1 of 4, and it actually scrolls down a little bit more. I just screenshotted the top part, but it gives you a background material, the same thing that you would be giving in probably a pre-lab discussion or something for them to read before they came to the lab. It's provided here. This is the material that things like Carolina and the eScience Lab do not provide. Then there is an experimentation section, and this is where the students would learn about the materials and collect their data, that sort of thing. So I just took an example from the water quality lab. This is the equipment that they used for the water quality lab. The pictures on the left are things that are included in the kit, and the items on the right are what they were to be provided by the student. So, you know, they used graduated cylinders, a graduated pipette. They had these graduated tubes. And then here on the left, they had tablets that they put in for color change for the nitrate, phosphate levels, and pH levels. They enter their data online. If you look on the screen here at the very bottom right, there's a little tab that says data. They click on that, and then they enter their data right on the website. So it would look something like this. They would type in, you know, their phosphate levels or nitrate levels, and their pH levels, and they also tested coliform. So they tested bottled water, tap water, and then they had to go and collect a water body sample, like from a river, a lake, or a pond, or something like that. So they put all of their data there. They can make a graph. This is from a different lab, but the water lab, they didn't have to make a graph, but this is from the species lab. So, you know, they can make graphs. And then there's the evaluation section where they write their report. So there's questions that they have to answer, and they answer them right on the website. And then it compiles all of those things together, and it takes the data, so it makes data tables, it includes the graphs, and the answers to the questions, and it makes a lab report, and then you can submit. Down at the bottom there, you can see where the students submit their data. And then it makes a PDF file that they can download, and you can have them upload the PDF to the submissions box on D2L. Or I just graded it right from the HandsOn Lab. I didn't have the students do the extra step where they put it on the submissions folder. There were also some labs that required them to have pictures to show that, what they did. Especially like the biome lab, they had to go and look at 2 different ecosystems, and they included some pictures. And these are actual student pictures. One of the students submitted this, so you can see they made a little quadrat there where they had to look at the diversity inside that quadrat. So in the report format, they answered questions, they had data tables, graphs, and sometimes pictures. So I was going to go on the website for the next part, the last few minutes. Let me see if there's any questions. Go ahead and ask here before I go on there. Is it feasible to collect class data? Are they running and completing the labs at approximately the same time? You can collect class data. I did that, not with the labs, but I did do that with the that data project that I did. They had to post their results, like their standard deviations, depending on what sample size I gave them. Like I gave them each a different sample size, and then they had to post the results. And then at the end of the week, they had to look at all of those and then answer different questions. So I think that you could do that. They did do the lab. Hi, Mark just showed up. They did do the labs each week. So I had them, like, this week we're doing water, this week we're doing soil. So you would be able to have them post their data, since they're doing the same labs at the same week. So I think that would be possible. Any other questions before I go do the interactive component? Okay. I have to share the screen here. Okay. So hopefully you can see that. This is the website, the HandsOn Lab website. These are all of my labs. So they would all be shown here. I'm going to just show you the water quality lab, since that is the one that we kind of talked about. And if you have any questions or want me to go back and show you something, I can spend more time on that. So again, here's the exploration. It gives them the learning objectives for the lab. It tells them how much time that they'll need to spend on this lab. Again, here's the background information, so you can see how, there's a lot of background information. There's several, pages. It talks about the things that they're going to be exploring, pH, nutrients, so they're nitrate and phosphate. So they do get all of this background material. This is the part, as I said, that's not available with some of the other companies like Carolina. This is why I chose HandsOn Lab. I felt for the pilot project and with the amount of time I had to prepare for the class, this was my best option. So here's the experimentation section. It goes over the materials that they need. It lists the student supplied materials. It lists the HandsOn Lab supplied materials. So this is where I was saying that I spent a little bit of time and I showed them what all of that material was. Like, for instance, it says that they needed 2 snap top vials. I wasn't 100% sure that the students would be able to pick out of that kit, which were the 2 snap top vials. So I like, these are the 2 snap top vials that you will need. So that's why I did spend some extra time. Depending on what your course is, you might not need to do that, but I did feel the need to do it. Here's the exercise. So it gives them the procedure that they do, and it tells them what to do. And if you can see down here on the bottom, it's a little bit covered up with my with the people's pictures here on Zoom. But if you see on the bottom right, you can click on the data, and then you can right, you can answer. I'm in the instructor mode, so it looks a little bit different. But you know, they would type in their answers here. So it's got nice things for the students, nice tables for them to enter into. So again, more the experiment. Oh, so then here are the questions that they would type their answers into. So it's asking them, you know, questions like you would in a regular lab. And then here's where they would do their final report. It shows their answers so that they can go back and change something if they want to. It shows their data tables. So this is kind of what the report looks like. And then there is a little, on the student section, there would be the little thing that says submit your report, and it produce the PDF for them. Okay, so for the last few minutes, I thought I would answer any questions that you have, or if you wanted me to explain a little bit more about any particular aspect, or if Mark, if you had anything you wanted to say, anything more before Mark's here.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions more on, you know, from the committee perspective in terms of it was an online lab and satisfying the learning outcome, particularly that part about the collaborative environment.
Can I ask a general question about your experience?
Sure.
Is this something it sounds as if it was generally favorable. Would you consider doing this again?
I would 100% do it again. I had a positive experience. I felt the students had a positive experience. They were all very happy to do, you know, to have the opportunity to do the online lab. I did, when we had the Zoom meeting with each group where we were talking about their experiments, I did kind of ask them, you know, what do you think of the online lab? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? Why did you take it? That's how I knew some of those items, like, you know, someone just had a baby, or, you know, people said that they didn't like the commute to Lincoln Park because it took them forever since they lived in the suburbs. So that's how I got some of that information. So I had a positive experience. Students had a positive experience. I told you that I really was blown away by their reports. Like I said, you know, every single group had graphs with error bars on them. They talked about their error in their presentation, which generally is not the case in the face-to-face class. I'm actually going to, if I teach the face-to-face version, I would change my face-to-face class based on what I did in the online environment. I would do that scaffolded project like I did in the online, which I don't do, you know, in the face-to-face class. I spent a lot more time designing the course because I was trying to make the SI committee happy. And again, I was afraid that I would be the reason why DePaul didn't do online labs. So I was very careful in how I designed it. I really tried to meet all of the learning outcomes. And I think it, you know, you could see based on the results that I did a good job at it. Not the on the back, but I mean, because I spent so much time designing the class, I think I got the result. Which again, I'm going to go back in the face-to-face class, and I would do the same thing, since I was more deliberate in what I was doing. Maybe Mark has a comment about, you know, would the SI committee want to do it again? You know.
We didn't, you know, when we discussed it, there was no negative feedback. I think, you know, it's kind of a funny situation, because if you take an existing online class, an existing SI lab class, we don't really have a role in the modality. So, you know, you could take an existing class, and I think actually, you know, anthropology is going to do another, is maybe this quarter's doing one. And then the committee wouldn't really step in until there's this course review process. So you know, I think we're very, you know, we're interested and we'd like to stay proactive, but we're not necessarily, I mean, we have some gatekeeping role, but only insofar as the class meets the learning outcomes. So, and I think people were favorably, you know, I didn't hear any negative feedback when Maggie presented. She showed what, you know, when she, especially with the scaffolding and what the students did in their projects, I think everybody was really impressed.
Were the grades pretty comparable to the face-to-face sections?
Yes, they were. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So Catherine asked, do you create those questions or are they provided by HOL? If the latter, can you modify them? Those were provided by HOL. Again, since it was new and I was trying to do a lot, I just used what was available. However, they do have totally customizable lab experience. So you can totally customize the whole lab. You can have your own background information. You don't have to use that background information if you don't want to, or you can add things that you want to add. You can add questions that you want to add on the tables. So it is totally customizable. I didn't do that for this private project, but it is possible. And is it challenging to get some students to participate as opposed to lurk? Are there strategies you use to engage them? You know, this is one area, I wouldn't say I struggle, but this is an area that I'm continually working on in any online environment, the lab or not. But I do find that, especially since I used the HandsOn Lab and some of that material was already pre-done, I had more time that I spent making sure students were, you know, turning things in on time, or if they weren't, you know, reaching out to them. But for the most part, everybody answered the discussion board questions. They did what they were supposed to do. And I did not get one email from students saying, oh, so-and-so's not doing anything in this lab project. You know, none of the groups said anything about nobody participating. And in each one of the presentations, each student at least said something in each of the presentation. So I felt that they were engaged. But, you know, again, I tried to be more present, right? I did the live office hours. I did my lectures where I was, you know, upfront present in each of the lecture videos. I was there for each of the labs. So, you know, I tried to be present, and I think the students were too.
And I think, you know, whenever you think about a question like this, it's, you know, the standard's not perfect, right? I mean, I think what Maggie was alluding to is almost every time, we always do group projects in lab. I mean, it's part of, you want that interactivity, but whenever you assign group work, you get, you know, there's always someone in the group not contributing 100%. You see that in person, and you certainly hear about it. So I think that, yeah, I'm sure in the online environment, there's some potential for one or two members to do more work than other people in the group, but that's just kind of par for the course with how labs work. I think chemistry, maybe their lab work is more individual in the chem department, but environmental science and studies, it's very common for our lab assignments to be group projects because environmental science is a collaborative endeavor. So that makes, so doing it online also makes sense.
I did find that each group might have handled things a little bit differently. Like there's a few lab groups that each student did, like they sampled from their area, because in their presentations, like they had rain level, pH levels of rain, like in Schaumburg and in, you know, Evanston, or, you know, downtown. So wherever they were, sometimes the groups did things like on campus, like the water fountains on campus. So they got together and they did the testing together. So I think each group handled it maybe slightly differently, but again, they all did something on the project.
Can I ask one more quick question? You may have said this, but I may have missed it. Did the students know the format prior signing up? Because I know within the College of Science and Health, we have a hard time when they register for a class. It usually just says under their online or hybrid, and sometimes they miss what format it's in. Was there a way that you made
we did? We wrote on there that it was an online class and that they would be required to spend $150 on a lab kit. So we told them ahead of time that they were going to have to do that. And I believe it also said that they would not have a textbook required. So that they knew that they weren't having to buy a textbook and in the lab kit. So there was the note on there.
You know, I know, Sandy, you've done a lot of student advising over the years too, but I think usually when students realize it when they don't say time, or they realize it's hybrid because they only see one time a week. That's usually, because you're right, when you just start clicking, it's in there somewhere, but often you're clicking at only the headline, you're not reading the note. So hopefully when you see that when you click in and there's no, Tuesday, Thursday comes up, that it will start dawn on them. But I think you're right, it doesn't always, because it's a missing thing, and depending how you look at it. The schedule optimizer, if you use the schedule optimizer tool, I think it's a little more clear because it doesn't show up, it's missing. It doesn't explicitly say it's online, but you don't see it.
Yeah. I did not have anybody that signed up that dropped like the first week after I started talking about, the online component, because I did send like news items through D2L. I also tried to get them to buy their lab kits early. So once I saw that they were, signed up on D2L, even before the quarter started, I sent them an email with the information about the lab kits, because it does take a few days, a week, like to get there, to get to the students, because they order it from the website and then it gets shipped to them. Anything else? Well, thank you all for attending. I hope it was, useful. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me or, stop by my office. If you want to talk more about it, I'd be really happy, because it's something that I'm, kind of passionate about. I'm willing to talk. And if you want to talk with Mark, I'm sure he's available too.
Absolutely. From the committee, just let me know.
Yeah, from the committee perspective.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Mark. That was great.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.